Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to Clemency and Justice, defending Southeast Asian immigrants from removal. We're proud to co-host this event with the Seattle Clemency Project and the Vietnamese American Bar Association of Washington. The WSBA has licensed Stritmatter as a sponsor for mandatory continuing legal education, so please stick around to the end of the presentation, at which time you can put your bar number in the chat for credit. So we're honored today to be joined by three incredible presenters: Jenny Pascarella from the Seattle Clemency Project, our own Melanie Nguyen from Stritmatter Law, and then Joanne Kalas from BABWA. So thank you so much, and let's get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie, and I'm very excited to be here today. I'm a partner at this law firm, Stritmatter, Kessler, Kohler, Moore, and I'm a board member at the VABA, Vietnamese American Bar Association of Washington, and we're very excited to be here providing this training for CLE credit on how to help defend Southeast immigrants from removal. The Clemency Project was founded in 2016, so they've been doing this great work for almost a decade, but we thought it would be especially important to provide this training in light of what's been going on in this current administration. During this presentation, we'll talk about what the Clemency Project is, how they operate, who's at risk of deportation, what's changed in the deportation landscape, and what deportation means to our community. We're going to be talking about the history behind mass incarceration and mass deportation, and then what we can do about it and how we can help. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So, Jenny.
Hello, everyone. I am Jenny Pascarella. I'm the legal director at the Seattle Clemency Project. I'm excited to be here, and thank you to VABA and Stritmatter for hosting this event. As everyone knows who's here, we're facing a very significant crisis facing all immigrants and really our country in general, but in particular the Southeast Asian community. And that's really the purpose of this presentation today, with the goal of hopefully enlisting many of you as lawyers and law students to step up and help take cases, because we have many people in our community who are facing deportation, some for the first time, despite the fact that they technically have been at risk for a long time, but under this administration are really facing very significant new challenges and likelihood of deportation. So just a quick note about what the Seattle Clemency Project does. We were started, as Melanie said, in 2016 to address people in Washington state who are serving life and long sentences. So really addressing the issue of mass incarceration in our state, the fact that we have people who have essentially been warehoused in our prisons, and there haven't been adequate legal remedies in our state to help people find a way out of prison who should not be there any longer. And that's largely because our state abolished parole in 1984. As a result, and as an outgrowth of the work that we were doing, really bringing cases before the governor seeking commutations and pardons, we realized around 2018, during the first Trump administration, that there was another crisis happening in our state, and that's the crisis of the excessive punishment, not just of our long sentences, but also that criminal convictions create mandatory deportation for a large number of people. And the only relief from that mandatory deportation that the law demands in so many cases is a pardon. And so for that reason, we began taking cases of immigrants who are facing deportation, bringing them to the governor and seeking a pardon. And we do all this work by matching cases with pro bono lawyers. So we are out in the community like we are today, asking for lawyers to step up and take these cases pro bono, to dedicate their time to helping, and sometimes the most I think rewarding types of legal work that you can do, getting somebody out of jail or prison or stopping their deportation. So with that, let's get into the topic today. So I want to give a little bit of just background, and this is, we only have an hour, so we're going to zoom through this. There's so much to talk about with all of this, but as folks probably know, after the Vietnam War and the collapse of the Laos and Cambodian governments, our government ended up taking in ultimately 1.25 million refugees to resettle in the United States over a period of many decades. And that has been the largest resettlement effort of any refugee population in US history. Washington State has a unique place in this history because in 1975, Governor Evans was the first governor in the country to welcome refugees from the Vietnam War. And he did so really in response to the fact that California was the first state to say, no, we won't take them, after many refugees were sent to Camp Pendleton in San Diego. And what were these refugees fleeing? Of course, they were fleeing the Vietnam War, the effects of the war, and the aftermath, which led to a genocide in Cambodia and the secret war in Laos. As folks may not know, because this is, I think, not widely understood, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia killed 1.5 to 2 million people, and that was a quarter of the population. So folks were fleeing some of the worst terror you can imagine when they arrived in the United States. They had survived some of the most awful violence one could experience. I had a video that I'm not going to show because I think it's going to make our technology a little bit wonky. But basically, I think the important thing to understand about this community is that at the time, so we're talking about a lot of this resettlement effort happened in the late 70s, 80s, up through the mid 90s. And coming off of the Vietnam War, the Southeast Asian community faced significant amount of discrimination. As folks know, the Vietnam War was not popular with Americans, many Americans, and so one unfortunate result of that was that the community that was being resettled here also faced significant amount of discrimination, which is also part and parcel of our history of racism as well in this country. And so that combined with the fact that this was the first largest and the first real resettlement effort made by the United States, where there was not significant resources allocated to ensuring an adequate transition, and that the community was really supported in that resettlement, as well as the fact that families were fleeing the most horrific torture, genocide, et cetera. That community then felt that children faced challenges in integrating, and ultimately one thing led to another, and there were many of the children that grew up in the United States, having left and been born in refugee camps, then faced then got involved in the criminal legal system as a result of often gang violence, and because of those interactions with the criminal legal system, then faced immigration consequences, which we'll get into. Oh, I'm going to skip that. So who's at risk now? There are not super great statistics, but nationwide, we think that there are about 15,000 people from the Southeast Asian community who have final orders of removal. That means that they were ordered deported by an immigration judge, but haven't been removed. Basically, what has happened over time is that because of interactions with the criminal legal system, folks who were here, and this community all came as refugees, which means that they had lawful status, became lawful permanent residents, usually immediately after coming to the United States. And then because of their criminal convictions, after they served their time, were then sent over into immigration custody, where they then received deportation orders. But until very recent, until this administration, people from Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia have generally not been deported to those countries, with some exceptions. There have been some deportations, but generally speaking, most people from those countries who had final orders of removal were not actually removed. And that means you have people who have lived in our country, who are, for all intents and purposes, just as American as everyone else, who are now facing deportation to countries that they have no connection to, or very little connection to. Many of these folks from these populations were born in refugee camps in Thailand before being resettled in the United States. So the change to the deportation landscape is essentially that a lot of the removals that previously were not happening, even though people had already been ordered deported, sometimes many decades ago, are now happening. And that's why our work is so important, is because to get out from under these removal orders, one needs to go back to criminal court and either vacate the conviction that created the final order of removal or seek a pardon. I'm going to turn now to Joanne to talk really about what it means to be deported if you're from this community. Joanne.
Hi. Yes. There's a question.
How countries are taking in people with no nationalities, like at immigration.
So it's not that they don't have nationality. They do have. So the question, sorry, is how is it that countries are taking back people who have no nationality? So folks from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, generally their countries are accepting that they are citizens. Okay. But what has happened historically is that those countries were not accepting deportees. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Joanne Kalas, and I am an environmental attorney here in Seattle. I'm also a longstanding member of the Vietnamese Bar Association of Washington. I have had the privilege of representing multiple Seattle Clemency Project clients over the years. And the obvious impact of deportation is, of course, the removal of someone from the United States. What I'd like to talk about is something that's maybe not as intuitive, which is really the threat of deportation and what this disruption does, not only to the individual that's here, but also to the community, especially to their family. So my first client was an immigrant from Cambodia, and as Jenny mentioned, he was born in a refugee camp in Thailand. He came to the United States when he was 3 months old. In 1997, he was convicted of criminal charges involving a firearm, and he served about 4 years of prison time. Once he was released, he reformed his life. He became a taxpayer. He became a husband, a father, a business owner, an employer. He and his wife had multiple businesses. And then in 2017, he faced an increased threat of deportation, and his brother was actually deported. And so this really set in panic and fear amongst not only everyone that he knew with his community, but also with his family. So he and his wife sold their businesses. They sold their home. They even considered, should they, to stay together as a family, should they try to go on the run? But my client knew that this really wasn't an option because he had 2 small children, and his youngest child was a special needs child that had severe medical issues. So he really knew that that wasn't an option for him. So he put his trust into the Seattle Clemency Project and to the Washington pardons process. And I'm happy to say that he received a pardon in 2018 and also now is a US citizen. But I will say that the year plus that I represented him, there was a real panic with him and also within the Cambodian community. And this is something that really kind of rips at the fabric of the people around him. There was another client of mine that was detained by ICE facing deportation 1 month after giving birth to her son. And so for the first year of her son's life, she was detained and not able to be with him. She was also eventually reunited with her child and her family, but it was extremely disruptive to a family with not a lot of means to figure out how to handle the care of a small child without their mother there, plus also trying to seek support and Seattle Clemency Project was there as well as other attorneys to help. I also just want to mention that for those going back to these countries, as Jenny mentioned, they don't have necessarily a community and a network there. A lot of them fled with their families to come here to the United States. And so they're going back to a place that not only do they potentially don't speak the language, they've maybe never been there, but they also, their entire family and network is here. So it's not only scary, but also extremely difficult for them to try and figure out what to do, especially with very little notice that that's a real threat for them. I'm going to introduce Melanie now to speak a little bit more about this.
Now, Joanne's client was facing deportation in 2017, and it's obviously very jarring to be deported to your country of origin. But now, in this new administration, there's even heightened danger. Just recently, maybe you've heard in the news, a Pierce County man, the one Phan, was recently picked up by ICE. He was supposed to be deported to Vietnam, but instead, ICE rerouted him to South Sudan. The Trump administration has recently made efforts to deport individuals to third countries, totally random, very dangerous countries, in an effort to not allow immigrants to return to the United States. South Sudan is so dangerous that earlier this year, the US Department of State issued a travel advisory urging people not to travel to South Sudan. But if they were to go ahead and do so, to create a will, to discuss funeral plans, and to make a plan for potential kidnapping and extortion. The one Phan had legal permanent residential status in the US, and his wife, Ngoc Phan, is here today to talk to us about what happened and how it's affected their family.
Well, hi everyone. I did not expect for my life to, end up like this at this time. It's actually really, really sad because when I think about June 4th, which is a couple days from now, it was actually when Tuan uh, mm, got into this altercation that ended up, getting him convicted of a 25-year sentence in which he served. So just to be standing here talking about this now, it's just surreal. But anyways, I never thought that, we would be a case study, but here we are. I guess, things have to happen for us to prepare and learn and kind of strategize, right? In terms of how to deal with this thing, especially as it relates to this administration's immigration agenda. It's actually very I don't know. Again, it's crazy. I don't believe that this is actually really happening. They are definitely testing the waters. I don't know how else to put it. First it was, I don't know if you guys heard about the Libya attempt, right? Where they attempted to send like 12 men to Libya, which is also a war-torn country. Thank God that the court got whim of that quickly, and they were able to halt the aircraft. And so these individuals were like on the bus, getting ready to get loaded onto this plane, right? And then the judge was like, no, 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 get them back. And so it's the individual, and I don't even know if you know this, but the individual that was actually supposed to be on that Libya flight is also in my husband's group right now. So it's absolutely crazy that they made this attempt once, was told by the court that they can't do this, and then they attempted again with the same individual. That's just absolutely just crazy to me. So I do think that they're testing the waters. First they thank God, the attorneys and judges, they were able to halt the plane, so they didn't get, the plane didn't get a chance to take off. Now they've tried it again, right? In secrecy in the middle of the night, the plane actually took off. So once the plane is off U.S. soil, it's very difficult to turn it back around, right? But again, thank God for the swift action of the legal team, and the quick ruling of the judge. He was able to divert the plane, and so the plane never made it to South Sudan. And currently, as it's being reported, the detainees, which includes my husband, they're on this U.S. military base in Djibouti, Africa, waiting, right, for the U.S. government to facilitate, the credible, fair interviews for these individuals. To date, they have not contacted their attorneys yet. I don't know why they're slow walking this thing, but I assume they're waiting for the Supreme Court ruling, because they've, petitioned the Supreme Court to allow them to continue with their illegal acts, right? This administration has a very difficult time even admitting that folks have due process, right? And as patterns would dictate, it's probably going to be like pulling teeth to get them to follow the court's ruling. So that's going to be another fight. I'm not going to stand up here and try to, justify what my husband did. He was barely 18 years old. He turned 18. 4 months later, he gets into this altercation, with this other group. I think when you're young, you're impulsive. You probably hang around with a bunch of groups that are not, within your best interest, and things happen. I get that they have a propaganda, that they're trying to spin, and then they're spinning this narrative about people are barbaric monsters and illegal and all of that. My husband actually is a refugee. He had permanent resident status. While he was in prison in 2009, they issued an order of removal that he was not even aware of. So that's another issue that we need to think about as to, are people being given the opportunity to challenge their order of removal while they're in prison, right? Because the immigration law is like, well, pretty much everything. I think the immigration law is it's very broad, right? So anything could be a violation, right? And it's not just about murder. I mean, I saw the list. It's like theft, or like even minor things that can make you deportable. But for most people, if they're in prison, and especially if they don't have like counsel or anything like that, and I've been told that immigration court is kind of like kangaroo court, right? They're going through and they're looking at these people's conviction, and if you've done something that violates, right, the immigration law that makes you deportable, they're issuing, right, these deportation orders, most of the time without notification to the individual, and so that takes away their chance to appeal as well, right? So that's another matter. But the point here is that he did this thing, he was sentenced, he served his time of 25 years. Okay, he did his whole 25 years, and so for him to come out and then have this happen to him, it's just sorry, it's really a bitter pill to swallow, Um, we've accepted the fact that, hey, okay, you have this thing that, is going to hang over your head. They're going to try to deport you to Vietnam. Okay, fine. That's your country of origin. We'll accept that. But then for them to kind of just pick him up in the middle of the night and secretly deport him to a third country that's in the middle of a freaking war right now, that's cool. That's cruel. And then not giving him the opportunity to contest this deportation. Less than 24 hours notice. And most of that time, it was after hours. So folks couldn't even reach their family. They couldn't reach their attorneys, So they do things in secrecy, at least from my experience. And, going through this journey with my husband and I the last 3 months, he was picked up directly from prison. He was never even given an opportunity to go out into the community. So it's the prison to ICE pipeline. And then I don't know what's worse. If, while he was in prison or now, I would probably say now, because at least when he was in prison, I knew where he was at. Now I don't know. I don't know if he's safe. I don't know if he's being treated humanely. I don't know any of those things. And so these are, it's not just about me and him, obviously, right? These are broader issues. This is going to affect all of us, especially for those that has done time. It's like double jeopardy, right? You get punished twice. So after folks finish their sentencing, don't they get a second chance? So I don't know. I just hope that, he is safe. And at some point, they're going to comply with the court order and allow my husband and the other men to contact their attorneys. We are still waiting for that. There's definitely, slow walking this thing for sure. Because it's been 2 weeks now, and you're telling me you can't set up a meeting the last 2 weeks? So this has definitely taken a tremendous toll on me. I've been a very private person my whole life. I don't share my personal life with anyone, especially as it relates to him, because I don't need the judgment. People don't understand. So to come out with all of this, it's been very taxing, but obviously I have to come out with it. And people need to hear his story. He's a human being. He's a good person. He made one mistake. and he shouldn't have to pay for it for the rest of his life. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all that you guys do.
Well, there's applause in the room, and I'm sure there's applause online too. That was very powerful testimony. Not gonna really admire your courage for speaking and not stopping since this happened. It's really tremendous. And you can't say it, I mean, no one could say it better than you can in terms of what's at risk here and what this community is facing. And I think the point really that deportation in these cases is a second punishment. It was bad enough that Tuan was going to be sent to Vietnam, but you and Tuan had come to peace with the fact that he was going to be transferred from prison and then likely deported to Vietnam, but then to be sent to a whole other country that's in the middle of a civil war, and now to be held incommunicado in Djibouti on a military base. It's just unfathomable. So that's why we're here, right? We're here to do what we can to stop this from happening, and hopefully also work on Antoine's case and try to bring him home. So his case is one of the cases that we are soliciting lawyers for. His eventually we have faith he will be released from custody, and to be able to restore his lawful permanent residency and come back to the United States is going to depend on post-conviction relief. In this case, a pardon from the governor. The cases that you see, the other two photos you see, so the middle photo on the screen here is Ngoc and Tuan. The photos on the outside are Sarith Chan and Paul Sarith Chan and Paul Chan, both individuals who were deported to Cambodia from Seattle and Tacoma. And they are individuals who I actually had the privilege of meeting and spending time with in person a few months ago in Cambodia, who really exemplify everything about what Ngoc has talked about in terms of the need for second chances, and how failed our systems are, that we don't provide those second chances, not in the criminal legal system and not in the immigration system. These are individuals who have left everything behind in the United States, their entire families, extended families, and had nothing when they arrived in Cambodia. And they've done a lot to persevere and make a new life in Cambodia, but they also deserve a chance to come back to the United States. So those are cases that we're also looking for lawyers for. I want to sort of take a step back, since this is a legal training, and give just a little bit of context about why the laws are like they are. If I can figure out how to get to the next slide. There we go. Hold on. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do this. Wrong direction. Sorry, one second. And how do you scroll? Okay, that's right. There we go. Yeah. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so how did we get here? How did we get from a situation where the United States was owning its own responsibility for what happened in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and welcoming the largest group of refugees in US history, to a place where we are now expelling so many of them? This is just, I think, overall a picture of our failures to this community, our continued failures to adequately integrate them into our society, to support them, and to really truly welcome them from beginning to end, to the point where we're now expelling them into extremely dangerous situations. The reason we got here is because, first of all, plain and simple racism. Immigration law is built on racial exclusion. And I think it's important for people to understand this, because it is the reason why our laws do not reflect the reality, which is that deportation in these kinds of cases is truly punishment, and it's a double punishment. The reason we got here is because our first immigration law was the Chinese Exclusion Act, That law, as you may know, was enacted essentially to do what it sounds like, to exclude Chinese who had come and had built our railroads, were important laborers in our country, because tides had turned and Americans became worried about basically the way that that was going to impact, our white culture. And so the Chinese Exclusion Act was enacted, and the first cases that went to the Supreme Court were cases testing the legality of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And in the first important case, in 1889, the Supreme Court called the Chinese strangers in our land and basically made the first important ruling, which was that actually the judiciary had very little say in immigration. It was the political branches, the executive and the legislature, that could decide who gets to be excluded from our country. Then in 1893, the limits were expanded, where the Supreme Court said, actually, it's not just like who we exclude, who gets to come into the United States, but who we can expel. And this is a very important moment in time, because the Supreme Court said, even for people who had come here, who had established residence, who were lawful residents, who had no intention of ever living anywhere else, they too could be expelled, could be deported from the country with very little judicial oversight, that it was the political branches who could decide who could be expelled, and the judiciary had very limited control over that. What that meant was that constitutional protections that are endemic in our system, that are part and parcel of our criminal legal system, that ensure that there is due process throughout the criminal process, don't apply in the immigration process, including that even the courts that decide our immigration matters, including deportation matters, are done through executive agencies. The second important thing about how we got here is that's the bedrock law, right? But then over time, starting in the 1920s, but really in the mid-90s, we had this obsession with crime and tough on crime policies that drove mass incarceration in the United States, that expanded criminal penalties for crimes, that created the 3 strikes laws, so life without parole, that created mandatory minimums in sentencing. That same pattern that was happening in the criminal legal system was also happening in the immigration system, where Congress said, now we're going to expand the criminal grounds of deportation to not just be serious things, but also fairly minor things. And for this huge category of crimes, if a lawful permanent resident or someone with lawful status commits these crimes, you're not only going to be subject to mandatory detention while you fight your immigration case, but mandatory deportation without any second chance. So immigration judges have no discretion to say, in your case, it's unfair for you to be deported, therefore we're going to allow you to stay. For a large swath of crimes, from, like, as Ngoc said, theft, where you could serve, in Washington State, you could have a theft conviction where you actually spend like half a day in jail, but your sentence might be over a year. That makes you mandatory deportation, to a serious crime like murder. A whole swath of crimes that can make you subject to mandatory deportation. The one safety valve in that law, and this is from that time where they wiped away all judicial discretion, but they said if you get a full and unconditional pardon from the president or a governor, it waives the immigration consequences of those crimes. And that's a safety valve that is so key for these cases. And what the graphs here show is just the reflection of how colossal these changes in laws were, because it drove our prison population to a point where we now have 1 in 4 of incarcerated people around the world are incarcerated in the United States, as well as the graph on the right, which shows the rise in immigration detention from 1994 to 2018. Just dramatic increase in the number of immigrants who are subject to detention. So of course, what this reflects is not only that the criminal systems and the immigration systems not work together because of that 1893 case that said deportation is not punishment. So therefore, You could be convicted of a crime, serve your time, be duly punished by the criminal legal system, but then be slapped with a second punishment of deportation and also immigration detention. And in so many cases, as anyone who's ever touched any of these cases will see, in fact, deportation is very often the worst possible punishment that someone can face. And I think that's especially true in these cases of individuals who have lived here their entire lives as lawful permanent residents and have known no other country other than this country. So what can you do? You can take a case. I made this slide mainly because I wanted to remember to tell you, as lawyers in Washington State, that if you take a case with the Seattle Clemency Project, you can get CLE credit, and you can get a CLE credit for every hour that you put into the pro bono case. You get 1 hour of CLE credit. But also, this is really the moment where we need volunteers to step up and be on deck to handle these cases. I can talk, if there's time, about some of the cases that are available, what exactly it looks like. But generally speaking, for these cases, we're looking at trying to push forward pardons to Governor Ferguson. And usually what that means is you're going before the board. In Washington State, we have a volunteer board of 5 members. It's supposed to now expand to 10 members, but at the moment it's 5 members. You file an application, a petition, and then if they approve you for a hearing, you go before the board and present a short hearing of the testimony from the applicant as well as their supporters, and then the board will make a recommendation to the governor about whether or not to approve the pardon. So I'm going to turn now to Melanie and Joanne to talk about their experience volunteering with the Seattle Clemency Project.
Another question.
Oh, sorry.
Just asking this as a federal public defender.
Yeah.
And not knowing kind of here, I hear what you say about governor. Have any of the DA's offices here been willing to work on vacating and sentencing?
Yeah, so the question in the room is about whether DAs here in Washington have been working on vacating or resentencing convictions as a form of post-conviction relief. The answer is yes. And that is another feature of the work that we do at the Seattle Clemency Project, working on trying to go back and vacate a conviction usually based on ineffective assistance of counsel by former defense counsel for not advising about immigration consequences. Yeah.
So I worked on my Clemency Project case, I think, starting in 2019, and Joanne brought me on. She introduced me to this Vietnamese man. His name was Pham. His name is Pham. He's still alive. He was convicted in 2019 when he was 1996 when he was 19, and he was released in 2000. After that, he moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he started working at his sister's nail salon. For the next 19 years, he was gainfully employed. He met his wife in 2004, and they had 2 children. And as Joanne discussed, he was constantly at risk of deportation. So that threat of deportation was hanging over his head his entire time after his release, which, as Jenny said, that's just awful, and that's really the worst punishment. So I want to talk a little bit about what we did working on the case and what that meant to me and how you work up these cases. What you do is you get assigned a case from Seattle Clemency Project. You get to know your client. Pham is on the left. You talk to them extensively about who they are, what they went through, what they've done since, get to know their family, interview their children, and it is just such an emotional process. I'm just especially emotional right now because I just had a baby, and so everything makes me want to bawl. But his daughters at the time when we met them, his oldest daughter was 14 and his youngest daughter was 9, and they knew that their entire life that their dad was at risk of deportation, and at any moment he could be taken away from them. And that I just it's just such an awful thing to live with. And Tree was just an amazing man. As Ngoc said, he made one mistake and he should not be punished for that for his entire life. We've kept in touch with him. They came to visit us in Seattle. They came for vacation. They didn't come just to visit us, but they spent time with us last year, and we saw them and got lunch, and they just constantly express so much gratitude for the impact that we've had on their life. We've kept their family together, and that is just, I mean, there's nothing more important than that. Joanne.
Something that people ask me quite a bit when they're considering taking on one of these cases is, do they need to be, a criminal lawyer? Do they need to be an immigration lawyer? And the answer is no. I'm an environmental lawyer. With these cases, Seattle Clemency Project has a lot of support resources to help you to learn how to take one of these cases. You always partner with an immigration attorney. Sometimes it's with Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Sometimes the client has their own immigration counsel, which has happened with one of my clients that was facing deportation to Vietnam that I mentioned earlier. And you are always constantly focused on whether or not a pardon is going to provide relief to this person. So within the structure of going before the Pardons Board, there are a set of questions that you always know are going to arise, either in a petition that you submit in order to receive a pardon hearing, or if you're lucky enough to receive a pardon hearing, actually at the hearing itself. And so Seattle Clemency Project has done so many of these cases that you really do have a really good support network and you can also watch videos online of prior cases to get a good understanding of, what to expect in this representation. One of the things that I find particularly rewarding is that as a lawyer, you often, if you're a litigator, it takes a very long time to go through the process. But here, when you represent someone before the Pardons Board, they actually vote then in front of you, and you can have immediate understanding of where your client, whether or not they're going to get relief. There's very few places, I think, in practicing law where you can actually sit with your client and sort of bask in that glory if you're able to get them a pardon or get them relief. And I will say that, I love what I do and my day job as an attorney, but the type of reward that you get on working on these cases and just to see how you can impact not only that client, but again, that entire community, the family members that are counting on them to be there. There's just really nothing like it. And I think that's why I'm getting a little emotional. That's why I have continued to work on these cases and why I've reached out to other attorneys saying, like, I think you would be interested in doing this. I think that this is something that would be rewarding to you. So don't be afraid if you don't have that kind of experience, because as I said, Seattle Clemency Project has supported many pro bono attorneys in bringing these cases. And there really is it's not necessarily formulaic because these are all individuals with their own individual facts and background, but you are well supported in providing this pro bono assistance. So.
Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, it's an important point. Our program, because it depends on volunteer lawyers, it's all set up so that we, as the lawyers and staff at SCP, are supporting the volunteers. So our job is to answer every question, to review pleadings, to review documents, and help you along through the process. Because we have time, I want to introduce a really important community partner, Boon Tai, who's here from CAGE, just to say a bit about the work that CAGE does in the community and also how we partner with them as really, I think, powerfully combining the power of the legal work that we can do in these cases with the community organizing that's so important. So Boon Tai, do you want to come?
I just want to start out by acknowledging that in the work that we do, is oftentimes it's the women, the mothers that hold down the most impacted, right? And so thank you, Ngoc, again, always for doing the most heavy lifting, sharing your story. and always being there for your husband. My name is Buntai Chim, he him pronouns. I'm with Cage. I'm a co-founder of Cage. And we work in the crimmigration or school to prison to deportation pipeline, primarily working with Southeast Asian communities. We were established around the same time. I think Joanne mentioned that she helped a gentleman with their case. Cage came about around that time because there was like a real huge increase in deportations in our community with the first Trump administration. And you know, Seattle Clemency Project and organizations like Seattle Clemency Project has been really vital and pivotal in the work that we do. We don't have the navigation skills, and obviously we're not lawyers or anything like that. We are the folks on the ground with the relationships with the people, and so it's extremely important for prospective lawyers, pro bono lawyers that can help navigate the systems and take these people along. Again, Joanne, incredible story, how impactful that is for folks to take on this work. Generally, how we partner with Seattle Clemency Project is we have one of our co-founders who is a formerly impacted community member named Manny Uch. He does a lot of work with impacted community, right? There's really indirect, informal ways to get to know folks in the community who might tend to trust community members more, and you know, the subject of deportation, the subject of, you know, criminal justice system is a very taboo thing in our community, right? Like, it's shameful, we don't talk about it, and a whole host of other issues. And so somebody like Manny is able to gain the trust of these community members. And I think you were in Cambodia with Manny at some point in time and connected with some folks that were deported. So um, uh, the work can't happen without folks like you. The work can't happen without folks like Seattle Clemency Project. And um, yeah, I can't underscore how important it is, and really, really take what the two presenters said about their stories and their experiences and how fulfilling it can be, right? Right? Because you're not only just helping somebody, I don't even know what CLE means, but getting your CLE, but also really building community, right? You're really getting into the community, you're getting into a part of the community that folks don't often want to talk about. And that's actually really really rewarding and powerful. Again, thank you, Ngoc, for doing the heavy lifting and doing the powerful work. And we hope that y'all can come on board and offer your services.
Thank you, Ngoc. Thank you, Jenny, Joanne, Buntai, and everyone for for being here. Now I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Edie?
What if you're not in the, can you help in the capacity?
So the question asked was, what if you're not an attorney? Can you help in any capacity? Jenny, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, we definitely can use help from non-attorneys. There is work to just do intake, which is like collecting people's information and stories to help us then as the lawyers to look over the case to see if it's something that we can do something about. But also the pardon process is actually not really a legal process, even though you know, legal skills help and they like seeing lawyers, but you could be a journalist, you could be a paralegal, you could be anything, any profession or any training that allows you to be able to write a compelling narrative and put all of the information together and then be able to support the person through the hearing process. So certainly we often see teams where there's like a lawyer and then a paralegal, or a lawyer and some other volunteer that are working together. That's usually like a nice pairing. But definitely don't be intimidated if, you know, if you aren't a lawyer but want to support these cases.
I think there was a question in the chat. What criteria does the Seattle Clemency Project look at?
Great question. The criteria, well, it depends on the type of case. For pardons, immigration pardons, we're looking at, you know, what is the crime? When did they serve their time? How long was their sentence? When did they come out? What are all the equities? Basically, to be able to say that this is somebody who really has merits a pardon. The pardon board standard is extraordinary circumstances. So you have to show that you can satisfy that. It's not a defined standard, unfortunately, which is frustrating as lawyers. But generally speaking, what we argue in these cases is that deportation for somebody who's lived here their entire life is extraordinary in and of itself. But then on top of that, we will, talk about the person's, commitment to the community, to their family, like how many children they have, if they're working, if they're productive members of society, their time in DOC in prison, what kind of programming they took, did they take advantage of educational opportunities? All of those are additional things that help to build strong cases. So there's no, requirements, but those are all things that we're looking at in terms of what makes a strong case. We definitely don't want to be presenting cases that we don't think will succeed. So usually, and that doesn't mean we're not taking hard cases. Some cases are very hard and we don't always win, but we are gathering the information and selecting cases that we think have a good shot. Are there other questions?
There was some in the chat.
Let's see if I can see.
Okay, here's a question that I want to answer that I thought no one had asked yet, but Young Ji has actually asked the question. So, and this is an important question that should be answered, which is how much time is spent on a case on average and how long can a case take from beginning to end? And I think this is an important question because we're all super busy and we want to do good work, right? So for me, I am a personal injury attorney and it takes at least 3 years for a case to start and resolve. And this is much, much, much faster. You get a case and a hearing date will be assigned within the year. Is that right, Jenny?
Yeah, after you submit your application. Yeah.
And then, but before that, it only takes really a few months for you to meet the client, talk to his family or her family, and get to know everyone and put together the pardon petition, which is frankly fast for me, I guess, as a personal injury lawyer who's creating these packages all the time. Joanne, how fast would you say it is for you as not a litigator?
I was a litigator, but I was a civil litigator with environmental litigation. So, but I would say that, each of the packets I put together were probably roughly, somewhere between 7 to 10 pages of written narrative with attachments that would go with it. And I would say that probably it took a few months to actually put them together. And often that was driven by the schedule. So we would look to see when the next deadline was for petitions to be accepted, because it's only certain times of the year that they accept those petitions and then hearings are assigned thereafter. So often we were just trying to rush and figure out which case really took, what length of time and prioritizing which cases to meet a deadline. Jenny, you might have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, they've changed it so there's no deadlines now for the.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so they'll accept rolling applications, but then it is a matter of just waiting for them to review it, to decide whether they're going to have a hearing, grant a hearing. Almost always these cases get them. I would be shocked if one of these cases didn't get them. There's also a new law that was just passed and signed by Ferguson 2 weeks ago that allows for expedited pardons for people facing deportation. So we think that'll also help make these decisions hopefully move faster. It doesn't govern the timing of the governor, which is a whole other issue, but at least with respect to how the board handles the cases, we expect that they will be able, once the application is filed, they'll be able to move those forward fairly quickly.
So
Ballpark. Yeah, so I looked at our pardon petition and it's about 15 pages, however long it takes you to put together 15 pages. It's very fast for me, so I don't want to.
20 hours yearly credit?
More than that, because you have to get to know the family, you have to prep them for the pardon hearing, which also takes some time. So how?
Yeah, so one of the things that the pardon hearing itself is really sorry, yes. The pardon hearing itself is quite crucial. So if you're lucky enough to get that hearing, you're now going in front of individuals that are going to ask some pretty hot questions. And to meet the standard that Jenny just mentioned is quite a high bar. So you're preparing not only your client to be drilled on probably what one of the worst things that's ever happened to them in their life, and to be able to respond in a way that's going to be sympathetic to this pardons board, but also potentially their family members, which can include children, a spouse. It's very emotional. So I would say that preparation of the family, it took just as long as actually writing the material. So I would say, though, that from start to finish, it's probably about 6 to 8 months, I want to say, for these cases, when you take on a case and then you submit it and then you actually have a pardon hearing. As far as how many hours,
I think
yeah,
that's hard to say. I
it's
think
hard
it's
to say.
dependent on what kind of work you do and whether you're kind of familiar with this kind of stuff. I think
How fast can you prepare,
Right.
witnesses, right, for a hearing? If there's two children and a spouse, as opposed to just your client by themselves, it's going to take less time. So just if you understand those kinds of skills and how much time it takes, it's a significant amount of time, which is actually one of the reasons why I reached out to Melanie, because these cases can it can be quite grueling. And once you find out that you have a hearing, you may want to, in fact, have the family come and meet you. And it's helpful if you have two people where you can be in one room meeting with the spouse, and someone else can be in the other room prepping, one of the other family members for the hearing. It does take quite a bit of time. But it also, I think, is really dependent on how familiar you are with these kinds of skills and these kinds of deliverables.
I think if you're a trial lawyer, there's no problem taking on a case and getting everything done in a month. I mean, frankly, if you know how to do, if you're a trial lawyer. So it really depends on your experience.
Which is why it can be good also to partner with another attorney, right, who may have those kinds of skill sets. Maybe you have a real strength in writing a good narrative, and you know another attorney who wants to work with you on these cases, who has that experience preparing witnesses and preparing for a hearing.
There was a question about, and I've heard this question a lot, whether the other states have this, because I think there's a couple watchers that are from out of state.
Whether other states have pardons or
Pardons board, I think.
Oh, no, the pardon board here in Washington is pretty unique to Washington. Every state does it differently. Some states have their parole board do pardons and then make recommendations to the governor. Some states don't have any of that, and it's just a straight direct application to the governor. So yeah, it really runs the gamut in terms of different state practices.
Is the Seattle Clemency Project partnering with any other states to share tips or share efforts or resources?
We work particularly with the Southeast Asian community. We have a network of lawyers around the country that talk regularly and share information about what they're doing in their states to support this population. So it's more informal, and we're members of CRAC and other groups nationwide that are supporting this community.
Jenny, here's another question
Yeah.
that you might be able to answer. The federal numbers don't seem to have exploded the way state prison numbers have. Why is it? Why is that? For-profit detention, feds using state resources, something else, do you know?
Well, so this is a question specific to mass incarceration, really, and I think it has to do with the fact that it's driven by state law and state changes to sentencing guidelines in the states. So that's where a lot of the focus on taking the kind of the war on drugs and the tough on crime era policies were implemented in the states that then led to the explosion of the sentences, really, and the numbers of people incarcerated. There were similar federal laws tracked it in similar ways, but not as extensively as in the state system. For-profit detention is really an issue for immigration, because most immigration detention facilities are run by for-profit companies, and that very much drives immigration detention and the scaling up, which we're seeing really explode right now under this current Trump administration. And it very much is tied to for-profit prison companies that are demanding those contracts.
Here's another question. With respect to deportation risks, is there a significant risk of deportation if you don't strictly follow USCIS rules for submitting information for immigrants, such as those who are seeking an LPR, such as not timely making a submission of a change of address notification to the USCIS for immigration?
This is really a question for immigration lawyer, which I can't really claim to be. I'm more of an immigration adjacent lawyer, but I would say that particular example, I wouldn't say is a risk. There are many different things that are putting people at risk that previously would not. So for example, if you apply for naturalization for somebody who is not eligible or is deportable, that could then trigger the government to then put the person in deportation proceedings. Generally, in other administrations, that wouldn't happen, but those are the sorts of things that if you make a mistake like that, could put a person at risk.
Kathy.
We have another question.
I'm sorry, I know we're at time. This kind of applies more broadly to the Seattle Clemency Project, but because we've heard and seen that the current administration is increasingly disruptive and isn't following by, their old playbook anymore, what kind of strategies are you changing in response to that?
Great question. Well, I mean, that's all playing out in real time, right? And I think the story that Ngoc told about her husband and the work that we're doing with her and with the community is very much like trying to figure out how do we respond. So and I think this is also a question in the chat, how the threat of now being deported to a third country and potentially being deported to a place like Djibouti or South Sudan or El Salvador, where you not only would be deported to a country you have no connection to, but could be detained, is so out of this world, unimaginable that, when thinking about our advocacy for pardons or with the governor, this is a definition of what extraordinary circumstance is, right? And the kind of thing that should merit a pardon. So as these things are playing out, it's changing, I think, the way that we do our advocacy and our legal strategies. And I think, potentially also will impact the claims that folks can make in court if they go back and try to vacate their earlier convictions.
Can I mention one other thing too? When we talk about facing an increased threat of deportation, so these individuals did have, orders of removal after their original convictions. But for decades, it was difficult to deport individuals to Southeast Asian countries because of just the numbers that these countries would take back from the United States. And so what the Trump administration really focused on, starting with the first administration, was to negotiate for greater numbers to be taken back. So then you have individuals who had been just doing annual check-ins for decades, showing up, saying hi to ICE, saying, yes, I'm still living here. I still don't have any change as far as, I have not gotten into trouble since the 90s, for example. And then all of a sudden, starting in 2016, 2017, actually, you then had individuals showing up for these annual check-ins and then being detained. So it really was something that was shocking, I think, to the Southeast Asian community. And that's what really increased the threat of deportation. And that's what's continued now.
Okay, I think we've run out of time. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. We hope that we've motivated people to take on a case or at least work with another lawyer to take on a case, because these cases are really important. They're super impactful and
If people that aren't here want to take on a case, what should they do?
I think what we're going to do is we're going to send an email out to a list of people who have RSVP'd, and you can indicate then whether you're interested and available. So thank you again, everyone. I think Cassie has a few ending remarks.
And you can reach out to Seattle Clemency Project also. They have a website.
Thank you so much, Jenny, Melanie, and Joanne. That was a great presentation. I'm going to upload this to our website and YouTube and then include all of the resources that they discussed today. So pass it on to anyone that that would be interested as well. Please put your bar numbers in the chat And thank you so much for being here this afternoon, this evening.